can start pursuing the lecture of Michele, and today's lecture will be dedicated to the liminality, which is one important issue which we are discussing still since only 4 months. So I'm looking forward to being here.
Yeah, today's topic is really the core, perhaps, of these classes. I would like to discuss with you the issue of the specificity of sea pilgrimage, what was known in the Middle Ages as peregrinagia maritima. So in this liminal space, which is in some way in the middle, it's not Earth, it's not, it's a liminal space in multiple ways. On one hand, the sea is the stretch of space dividing Western Europe from the Holy Land in the pilgrim's perspective. On the other hand, it is a liminal space in the sense that it is a liquid space, which is not the environment of everyday life. It's something different, something other, which can be experienced also in religious terms as a border between different dimensions which can be considered to be earthly, but also in some way spiritual. It's also the space where different entities are considered to be present, and where perhaps even the different worlds come to fight with each other. I mean, the world of demons, the world of the spiritual entities, the world of humans come together, so to say, in this liminal, in this border, in this frontier between the different earthly, under-earthly, I don't know if we can use this word, and spiritual dimensions. And this voyage begins, as we told yesterday, in Venice, which is itself a liminal space, a very unusual setting where water and earth are combined in this unusual space of the lagoon. This is something we saw this yesterday, something which is noticed and remarked often by Western pilgrims. And this slide shows the very moment when the ship comes out of the lagoon and enters the Adriatic Sea. It's marked by the church of San Nicolò di Lido. Saint Nicholas was the protector of seafarers in general, so it's not by chance that the abbey devoted to St. Nicholas, where his relics, alleged relics, and especially the new iconographic relics of the mitre and crozier were preserved. It's also the space where the Doge celebrates the yearly marriage of the Serenissima of the Republic of Venice with the sea. So it's a highly symbolic a stretch of water. But this is the real place. There are some markers on the coast which enable you to understand that portion of water, that stretch of water is not just a normal space, but it's invested with exceptional meanings. And we will see that the inspection of the coast plays a very important role in the experience of pilgrims throughout their voyage to the Holy Land. Well, but now about some practical issues of the trip. The late medieval voyage to the Holy Land, which begins in Venice, it is in Venice that pilgrims embark to the Holy Land. It is organized twice a year, in normal conditions, in spring and in autumn. In the 15th century, it costs around 40 through 50 golden Venetian ducats. It lasts for approximately 5 weeks. 5 weeks in the ship. This is a completely new experience for most pilgrims, and something which in some way changes their way of understanding the world in general terms. Normally, pilgrims sign a contract, very specific, detailed contract with ship owners, where everything is described in a very precise way. So, for example, we have a very good specimen in Felix Fabry's travelogue. I told you yesterday that Felix Fabry is one of the most loquacious sources we have, and he wrote actually 3 volumes of description of his trip to the Holy Land. So, the ship owner is normally a member of a prominent Venetian family, such as the Contarini, for example. They were often engaged in organizing voyages to the Holy Land. So let's say the travel agency, the most important travel agency in Venice. The ship owners normally binds himself to lead all passengers to the Holy Land and also to bring them back. This is clearly stated. Departure is fixed within the following 14 days. These 14 days which are normally used by pilgrims to visit the churches in Venice and its surroundings. The ship is a Venetian galley, which has to be equipped with experienced sailors and sufficient weapons against pirates or possible Turkish attacks or whatever. All unnecessary stops must be avoided, provided that provisions keep sufficient. So the ship owner engages himself to make stops only in those port of calls where necessary provisions can be obtained, because otherwise the voyage would last for too long. The ship owner also binds himself to provide passengers with good bread and good wine, biscuit, I will say later what is biscuit, fresh water, meat, and eggs in sufficient quantity. In the morning, a small glass of liquor or grappa, I don't know, whatever, will be served to all passengers, which is very good for stomach, but this reminds me of usages which are still widespread in the Veneto and also in the Balkan Peninsula, so perhaps it's connected also with ethnicity of sailors. Passengers will also be provided regularly with nourishment, even if we know that when the ship stops in some ports, passengers are accustomed to get some fresh meals along the coast. Sailors are also supposed to protect pilgrims and to provide them with any necessity they may have. Reasonable time will be allowed for visits. So this is also an important point. So for example, those who wish to go as far as the river Jordan have to be waited for by the sailors. The ship should not sail back until they finish their tour. In general terms, in the Holy Land, the captain has to act as a guide and protector. All safe conducts and bills for donkeys and other expenses have to be paid by the captain. So, as I told you, the general price is 40 ducats, but in case somebody decides to go further to the Sinai Peninsula, 10 ducats will be given back to him. Yeah.
40 ducats really expensive, or
it's expensive enough, let's say.
But do you have any comparison, like in other consumables, what can cost 40 ducats? I don't know a house, how much costs a house?
Yes, we can have, but basically it is a relatively large sum of money.
So
And
you can sell your house and go to Jerusalem, let's say.
yes, but probably, you know, this is Felix Fabri's contract. I suppose that there were also options for less rich people.
It seems to be all included. I mean, we did
This is all included. This is all included. But yeah, and it also depends from the travel agency, so to say. I mean, he is embarking on the Contarina, the most important galley of the Contarini family, which is a, let's say, a deluxe galley, for so to say, not really. Well, yeah. No, no. You know, Felix Fabri is a Dominican, and he has to rely on a lay ship owner to organize his trip. There is no special connection with the church.
So church is not organized?
No, it's a completely lay organization. Well, each pilgrim will have a specific place on board, and this place includes also sufficient space for poultry, because if you want to bring your own poultry to use it, to eat it during the voyage, you also have to have it close to your bed, basically. But the sick people, if there are any sick people, they have the right to have a reserved space. There is also a reserved space for women. We know this from other sources. And then the final element, anything not specified yet usual, is considered to be tacitly accepted.
Oh.
Yeah? Which is very not really very clear, but anyway. According to Wilhelm Severs, he instructs us about provisions to be made in Venice before embarking. So first of all, one has to ask for papal dispensation to travel to Palestine. Why? Because Palestine is a Muslim-ruled country, and basically, at least in theory, it's forbidden to travel in the lands of the Saracens because they are infidels. And it's also, obviously, in theory, it's completely forbidden even to have commercial relations with Muslims. One has to have a papal dispensation also for these. And you can imagine to what extent this was respected by Venetian, Genoese, and other merchants from the Italian peninsula.
May I ask, since when this?
Since the fall of Acre. Since 1291, there is a special prohibition against any form of connection with Mamluks, especially because they were the rulers of the whole area between Egypt and the Syro-Palestinian coast. So it was, in theory, it was forbidden, but in practice, one could easily get a papal dispensation to the extent that pilgrims bought such dispensations directly in Venice. They were provided directly by the ship owner, so by the Contarini family could allow herself to have very good contacts in Rome to get such dispensations. But in case you were unable to get the dispensation in Venice, and this was the case for most pilgrims, they could get one from the Father Guardian of the Franciscan convent in Jerusalem, who had the right to act as the substitute of the Pope. So in any case, there was always a solution for this problem. We even read that in some instances, the Patriarch of Venice could also substitute the Pope. He was also authorized under some circumstances to give the dispensation for travel. Well, the second thing to do in Venice before embarking was to consult local doctors about possible health problems connected with navigation. And normally doctors recommend to bring spices and not perishable food, such as saffron, cumin, ginger, almonds, rice, barley, raisins, dried plums, beans, and chickpeas. No? So this is the provision to be made. Then pilgrims engaged in buying a sufficient quantity of red wine. I'm always astonished at seeing they were traveling to very hot countries, and nevertheless they couldn't renounce to wine. So when they were not enabled to drink wine, they were much disappointed, and they noticed this in their travelogues. Today we couldn't drink any wine, and this was considered to be catastrophic in some way. So, so you think it's connected with the physiology of pilgrimage?
It's strange because in sense by boat, but probably I never traveled in galley, so I don't know how your body is feeling. But probably it must be like improving. It's sleep after a day of strong work. If you drink like even one small glass of wine, you are like much more relaxed and you go to sleep really. And I think we remember all the evenings when you didn't get wine.
Well, anyway, yeah, perhaps it's connected with yeah. But I don't know. I'm still astonished. Yeah.
But I could understand that you are in this close group. You are always together. You are tired because you spend time there. Small glass of wine.
Well, anyway, so apart from red wine, one could also buy biscuit, sweet bread with onions and cumin, dried meat, and dried fish. So, just to be sure. Then also implements could be bought in Venice, including a big basket, for example, an earthenware jar for carrying water. And we saw that water was normally taken in the neighborhood of San Nicolo di Lido. Then a cotton mattress. The pilgrims recommend to bring a cotton mattress instead of a feather one, because this was much better against heat and worms. Then blankets, obviously, and some pots. And then very simple clothes. They recommend linen and shirts and high, strong shoes. No? Which is very reasonable, and I think you perfectly agree with such suggestions. Okay, this is the representation of Contarini's gallery, La Contarina, as it was represented in Bernard von Breidenbach's travelogue by Erhard Reuwig. Well, it's interesting to see that Felix Fabre, yeah, sorry.
How big the gallery were?
Well, it was relatively large. I don't know if there is any specific study on this, but it was large enough to be compared to a convent. So, and this is what Felix Fabre's Evagatorium says, which is interesting because he makes use of a metaphor dating back to Saint Jerome. And he says that the galley is constructed in a convent-like form. So there is a locus orationis, a chapel near the main mast. Then there is a common refectory where all sailors and pilgrims eat. Then there is a dormitory and kitchens. So he makes a very strict comparison with the setting of spaces within a convent, which is in a way, Felix Fabry appropriates the structure of the galley and conforms it to his devotional experience. So in some way he is suggesting that even voyaging on a ship can be compared in some way to life in a convent. So it can be associated with this. We have also this other wonderful miniature in Konrad Grünenberg's travelogue in one of the manuscripts preserved in Karlsruhe, and we see, at least we can get an idea of the impact of this galley on pilgrims. Or another picture from the same manuscript.
I was thinking about the text. So and you don't think that this decision to compare it to the monastery is not only a question of, let's say, appropriation, but also a rhetorical tool in order to, in a certain sense, justify the pilgrim for a monk, telling I'm not changing my nature. I'm like.
Yes, it's like that. The problem is that the behavior in ships is not exactly that of monks in monasteries. So he has to justify, especially to the nun who is going to read his travelogue, that he had the opportunity to keep his habits even within the ship. And so he insists on this parallelism, but obviously it's not that the truth. But it's interesting that you can in some way present your voyage to the Holy Land as something conforming to Christian devotional standards, which won't alterate your way of life in some way, if you want. If the problem is that if you don't want, there are many occasions to sin or to, and we will see now, because one of the peculiarities of ships is their cosmopolitanism. I mean, the galley's crew itself is extremely composite from an ethnical, linguistic, and even religious viewpoint. So the captain and most officials are obviously Venetians, but the galley's slaves stem from many different countries, and especially from the Balkans. So they are mostly Croats, Macedonians, Albanians, Greeks, Turks, and Arabs. So most of them are Slavs, actually, are Slavic-speaking people. And Fabry remarks how miserable is their life. They said they are so accustomed to the miserable conditions of their life that they tend not to work in a very intensive way, so that the guardian is obliged to strike them like donkeys, he say, and he also say bad words against them, and so even hearing this continuous profane lay litany can be extremely dangerous for the soul of the pilgrim. And they are always there. They cannot abandon their seat. So even during storms, they are completely washed by water, but they cannot abandon their position. How uncomfortable is this voyage? Extremely uncomfortable, I would say. We are accustomed to modern ships, but we are speaking of a very different way of voyaging. So one deck is reserved for passenger. Each pilgrim has a very tiny space equipped with mattress. We saw cotton mattress especially, cushion, blankets, and urinal. Women have separate cabins, so perhaps it's better for women to travel on Venetian galleys in the 15th century. Men sleep close to each other with their heads toward the outside of the boat. Baggages lay in the middle. And when we speak of baggages, we have to think of big objects. So there is practically no way to go through mattresses. And this is a problem, especially when one has physiological needs. There is a terrible smell. Fabri says, "Raro mane stat urinale non eversum." And I think there is no need to translate because you understood. The pilgrim's dormitory is located close to the bilge, the sentina, or the galley, whose smell is even worse than that of urinals in the morning, according to Fabri. And because it's sea water stained there and it's corrupted water, actually. Meals are the same for everybody. So it's important to stress an aspect of this. Everybody, regardless of his or her condition, social position or whatever, sleep together in the same space, one close to the other. It doesn't matter if you are a prince or a bishop or a friar or a mendicant. So you stay there, close to the other, and you smell the same terrible smells, and you participate in the same life. So in a way, it's a strange democratic experience for the Middle Ages. You can have only in this context. This makes an incredible divide vis-a-vis everyday life. So all the hierarchical divisions are overcome in the ship for practical reasons. Also, the meals are the same for everybody, and they are typical Italian food. So, emmer soup, salad with olive oil, which is something that whose taste is exotic for many pilgrims coming from Northern Europe. Mutton, fish, eggs, cheese, wine mixed with water, which also seems strange to some northern people. Yeah. Biscuit becomes as hard as stone after a few days and has to be dipped into either water or wine. So what is biscuit? Well, I was delighted to read that Felix Fabri makes use of the term paximatios or paximates. This is a Greek term which is still used it's typical of the Cretan dialect, and if you go to Crete, you will find everywhere paximades made in this way still today. It's very good with tomato, you know, when you dip it with something, obviously. Biscuit was the Venetian word, which means actually that the bread is cooked twice. No,
So
simply.
This is curry. It's like really the maritime tradition did also.
Yeah, in Italian it can also, it's known also as galletta or
It's
something.
supposed to be like dry, I think.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be dry in order to resist more time, is the idea.
Yeah, exactly. This is the way. When you are forced to stay in the ship for many days without having an opportunity to make a stop in some parts of Gaul, the only bread you can eat is this one. Yeah.
One of our main recipes during the walk is with biscuits. So, no, really, the experience is not the same because it's light and we resist several days without eating.
Yeah, but I'm sure that in your experience you never had this problem. The ship's hardly accessible facilities. So when you have physiological needs in a Venetian galley, if you are a pilgrim going to Santiago or to Mont-Saint-Michel, you can simply go to a field somewhere behind a tree or whatever. But on a ship, there are no toilets. Or better, there are so-called toilets. Basically, they are like small windows on the higher part of the ship, where you put your bottom and Felix Fabri gives an incredible description of these. I will read in Latin if you allow me. Mane vero dum peregrini surgunt et venter sum beneficium postulat, which is it's wonderful in Latin. Ascendunt et ad proram vadunt, in qua abutraque parte rostri prore sunt loca processione aptata. Stant erga ante loca aliquando tredecima ut plures et expectant ut un expedito alter sedem capiat, nec est ibi verecundia, sed potius iracundia, quando quis nimis diu locum occupat, when somebody stays there for a longer time. Porro nocturno tempore habet magnam difficultatem venire ad illa loca propter homines, qui per totam galeam iacent et dormiunt. So you have to go through bodies, actually, laying in the ship. Maxima vero difficultas in tempestatibus, quando loca secreta continue sunt fluctibus operta, et remi retracti super transtra. Ille ergo, qui se in tempestate vult purgare, oportet ut se exponat totali madefactioni, qua propter multi nudi omnibus indumentis despositis accedunt. So actually they were completely washed during this. So this gives you an idea of how complicated it was to live in a Venetian galley. Then the other problem is that traveling, voyaging on the sea is terribly boring. So what can you do during the day when there is no stop at any port? Well, some pilgrims go around and buy wine and drink it. Some others play dice and cards, which is considered by the Dominican friars terribly sinful. Some others play music and sing. Some chat about profane topics. Some others say prayers with rosaries. Some sleep all the time. There is also a practice of rope skipping. very useful. Some simply glance at the coastal landscape, which may be rewarding in some way. And some clutch louses and fleas all the time. So this is the very amusing description by Felix Fabry. But, you know, in some way, one has to be happy when there is an opportunity to be bored. Because in many occasions, there is nothing boring in a sea voyage, during storms especially. You see this image, it's the fragment of a mural preserved in a small Franciscan church in the neighborhood of Siena, which clearly represents a storm near near Venice. This is Venice, Piazza San Marco. You see the columns of Sant'Odaro, the column of St. Mark. And here on the mainmast, devils are trying to completely crash the ship. The Archangel Michael is appearing, and he's ready to defeat them. And you see, everybody is moving on the ship, is trying to do something to prevent the shipwreck. And passengers are praying. Some of them are even exhibiting an image on a cloth, which is an image of Blessed Michelina of Pesaro, therefore a coastal town where this blessed Franciscan woman was worshipped. So probably this fresco, this mural, represents a miracle taking place in front of the coast or the marches. Well, it's a problem. It's even a topos in Christian literature to say that traveling by sea is dangerous. The Ecclesiasticus, book of Sirach, says, qui navigat mare e narrat periculum eius et audientes non admirabimur. So there is a biblical resounding in the words of pilgrims describing storms. In some way they are frightened, but also they have the opportunity to experience something they have read in the scriptures. And you know, perhaps one of the most important fictive travelogues we have, that of Francesco Petrarca, was written relying only exclusively on literary sources, and he explains why he decided not to go on pilgrimage to the Holy Land, because he was extremely frightened by voyaging on the sea. Cum multe igitur meteneant cause, nulla potentiur, quam pelagi metus. And you know, all pilgrims remark that if you escape a shipwreck, this is really something you have to tell. Those who travel by the sea have many horrendous things to tell in case they manage to escape them. So everybody has to be, they write this because future pilgrims have to be aware how dangerous voyaging by the sea may be. There are many dangers which come to be listed in a detailed way. Again, Felix Fabry, after all these things mentioned were done, I fell ill. So it's very easy to get sick when you voyage on a Venetian galley. And the time of departure was approaching, and the doctors refused to allow me to go abroad. Sorry, this is not Felix Fabry. This is Leonardo Frescobaldi. You Florentines are not used to the tempests of the sea, as we and others of the maritime are. And though the most healthy in the world, such a passage as from here to Alexandria will harm the robust body of any sailor. So even for sailors, it was common to get sick. And some of them died, simply. Travelers record the people who died during the trip. And it was common practice to write one's own testament before going on a pilgrimage, because it was very usual to die during this experience. So a priest from Casentino was suddenly dead. But let's see which kinds of dangers you can expect to experience. There are basically, Felix Fabri pretends that there are three main kinds of dangers you can experience. Razione maris, that is, if you crash against a rock or an even bottom. Razione aeris, the sea is made rough and stormy by the winds. So shipwrecks are caused by the combination of winds and bad weather, by the action of opposite winds, by the dimensions of the ship, and by human negligence. On the contrary, becalmed ships, obliged to stay offshore for many days, run an even bigger risk, given that food and water quickly perish and voyagers easily fall ill. So, too many winds are dangerous, but also the lack of winds is extremely dangerous. Then razione navis, all other dangers are gathered under this category. They are associated with the unhealthy life of sailors, basically, because in sailing, in general, causes fear, headache, nausea, vomiting, lack of appetite and thirst, bowel upset, nervous tension, health dangers, and death. And then there are also other secondary dangers, such as collisions with big sea animals and pirates' attacks. So you have really to be extremely determined to go, because it can be, you run many risks during this trip. This is interesting. I'm saying all this just because I'm interested in stressing or trying to reconstruct the psychological approach to the holy sites pilgrims were visiting. I mean, they were coming from this experience, and we can imagine how important it was, how natural it was to invest holy sites with specific meanings, also associated with the risks and dangers of navigation.
Yeah. Short question about the question of risks. Do you have like statistics? I can imagine it's really difficult. But my question is, I would not say I don't know. Do you have an idea how many Venetian boats were attacked by pirates, for example, or something like that? Because I would also interpret in some sense all those dangers you are listed, like also tell how difficult it is, but not only because it's really difficult, but also to like say, and I did it. So it was such a big danger. I had all those problems. It was supposed to get them. You understand me? I mean, if it's really so risky as it seems to be, or if it's like, yeah, you can have that, but it's like 5%.
Well, it was risky because pilgrims frequently describe such situations, such as storms, risks of shipwrecks of any kind, and pirates' attacks. We have many instances. I will show some of them. I don't have statistics, but it's something which is frequently described. Some kinds of dangers are always present during the navigation.
And of course, you have this story of the person
no,
who went back.
We even have a pilgrim who experienced a shipwreck. Niccolò de Martoni, for example, 1395. he was caught by a storm in the Levant Sea, and he was obliged to find a new ship in Cyprus. So this is one of the, we have descriptions which are, and I will show some of them now. Well, now first of all, to the religious dimension of navigation. Even if many profane activities are held on board, sailors are also much engaged in performing some kinds of special rites connected with navigation. So, first of all passengers, sailors and pilgrims cross themselves when boarding the ship. So it's like entering a church in some way, but the meaning is completely different. It's a kind of apotropaic gesture you make against the perils of the sea. If there are any priests on board, they are often asked to sing the Veni Creator Spiritus before weighing the anchor. This is also a very common practice everywhere. And then there is a very special prayer, which I will be describing in more detail, named Bona Parola or Santa Parola, the Holy Word, which is specific for sailing. And it is performed in several occasions, but basically when sailing, when starting the trip, then each day at night, at the evening, and also when the sea, when the ship finds itself far from the coast and stays without winds. Okay. One peculiarity of religious life on board is the so-called dry mass. So it's a mass which includes only the basic, it has more or less the basic structure of a normal mass, but without a Eucharistic canon. Because obviously you cannot transport hosts on board. They will perish very quickly. So for that reason, and you can obviously not use paximades or whatever for that. So it's even prohibited by the canon law to perform the mass within the ship, but nevertheless, there is a rite which is performed regularly. And it's very interesting what Felix Fabry says about that. Fabry is the main source about this usage. Tribus enim vicibus per diem, so 3 times a day. Adorant in navibus Deum. Primo mane in ortu solis. Tunc enim aliquis de servis domini patroni stans in alto ante castello, on the mainmost. The mainmast, imperat fistula silentium. And so there are no bells, but you can use a musical instrument, a flute, to announce the beginning of the rite. Quo facto erigit tabulam. So from the mainmast, if I understand it correctly, he exhibits a painted table, a painted image representing the Virgin Mary with a child in her arms. Quam cuncti videntes Genua flectunt. Everybody kneels in front of the image. Et Ave Maria dicunt. And they say Ave Maria. And alias orationes, si placet. Statim autem ut tabulam remittit, when the image is concealed, incipiunt tubicines canere tubis, et tunc unus quisque procedit ad opera solita. So it's what is of interest for us, obviously, in this case, is that the ritual is is directly connected with the ostension, let's say, of a painted image. So in some way the image plays the role of seeing the host in the normal Mass. Here there is no Eucharistic rite, so in some way the visual focus becomes the painted image. And this is repeated 3 times around midday and again at evening. So, especially important was the so-called the good night prayer. Tertium tempus, quo in galea laudant Deum, est in occubitu solis. Tunc enim omnes congregantur ad malum. Malum is the main mast. Ubi est galeae forum, a sort of square. Et genibus flexis cantant Salve Regina. Et in singularibus angustiis premittum litanias. So the rite may change according to the specific conditions of the sea. If the sea is not that calm, so it's better also to add a litany, and we will see which kind of litany. Post salve facit cum fistula signum camerarius domini patroni, et statim in alto pronuncians optando omnibus bonam noctem, ex parte patroni, et iterum sicut mane ostendit tabulam beate virginis, ad cuius ostensionem dicunt tria Ave Maria, sicut fieri solet sero ad pulsum. It has to be stressed that this is also the period, the historical period when the devotion for Ave Maria had started, and Ave Maria was normally in towns performed at the sound of bells. So here we have the fistula, the flute, and in some way it's surrogating bells in this way.
You can even make to break, Michele, if you will, because it's 11:05. It's okay for you to make 5 minutes of break, so you can like get a bit of oxygen. But if you're leaving, please close the door. Don't let the
Okay. So perhaps we can imagine that images exhibited from the main mast of Venetian galleys may have been icons, Byzantine icons, as in the case of the Madonna della Consolazione, which, according to legend, according to local tradition, was used by Sebastiano Venier in his ship during the Battle of Lepanto. So, and it's still preserved in Venice, in Santa Maria Formosa. So you see, it's an icon of mixed style, Cretan and with Venetian elements, which may have been really be done explicitly for a use in a ship.
But just for, it's interesting for me because it's quite old-fashioned, having been used during the Lepanto battle. So
yeah.
It's just like the idea that they are using colored images because it has to be more protective, or I mean, you understand, if they are already like miraculous.
Okay, in Venetian culture, the 15th century, icons were frequently used in domestic settings as devotional items. We have many instances of this. But also we know from some sources that icons were perceived as more efficacious on devotional grounds rather than contemporary Venetian paintings. It would be a long discussion, but we have some clear references to this approach to icons. Okay, but let's come to the so-called holy word, the Bona Parola or Santa Parola. Until some years ago, we had only one version preserved in a Florentine manuscript from the 15th century. But most recently, some years ago, a new version was found in Genoa. And it is written in Genoese dialect, so really in the language used by sailors in ships. So it was a very strange prayer, which did not correspond to any liturgical prayer known in other contexts. So it was something really connected with the needs of sailing and navigation. So, for example, the Genoese version begins in this way: O stai su varendomi e diremo la bona parola de pardie che Deo ne fassa salvi. So lines up, worthy men, and let's say the good word for departing, so that God may save us. So the version preserves the very first moment in the voyage when this prayer is performed. So when sailing, when leaving the first port. Whereas the Tuscan version stresses the fact that this prayer is used when galleys or ships or other boats don't see any stretch of coast for some days. So basically when they are lost in the open sea. But we know from the Genoese version, but also from Felix Fabri, and it had not been noticed until now, that the same prayer was performed every day at night. So it was connected with a good night prayer. The good night prayer, the dry mass for good night, was performed for pilgrims. But after pilgrims left and went to their dormitory, sailors stayed there and performed the good word. So this is something really only for sailors. This has nothing to do with the rest of passengers. And you see what Fabri said. Cum iam tenebre incipiunt esse, stat scriptor Galeae in castello, et incipit quoddam carmen longum in lingua vulgari italica. So it's not Latin, it's Italian, or the local Italian dialect. Et annectit letaniam, adequam omnes galeote et navis officiales, genibus flexis, respondent, et multa ibi dicunt, et protraunt orationem quasi ad quadrantale unius ore. So it's a very long litany. It takes almost 1 hour to perform it. Uic orationi sepe adsit, so he was a witness of this. And it ends regularly with a final invocation, obviously after a Pater Noster and an Ave Maria. There is also prayer for Saint Julian. Why Saint Julian? Because he was a protector of travelers in general. And this is confirmed also by the Genoese version. I have to say that it is written in such a Sibylline language that even Genoese people are unable today to exactly understand what it means. O Signoi facemo pregera a Dei, Madonna Santa Maria lo benedicto me se San Giurian che n'ha traito de bon porto ne conduca maggiore. So basically it's they are expressing the wish to be protected by God, by the Virgin Mary, and the specialized saints for navigation to come from one port to another. So please protect us and enable us to come from this port to the following one without dangers. No? And this is a very important practice. It ends with a formula in Latin which has no parallels in other liturgical texts, and it invokes God Himself, who helped our father to go through the Red Sea, to help sailors with their navigation, to assist them until their final destination. But more specifically, they ask God to have a quiet night. They don't want, they hope not to have a storm, not to be forced to wake up in order to avoid the dangers of a shipwreck during the night. Concede quesumus Domine, noctem quieta, mare tranquillum, ventum securum, et benedictio tua sit super nos semper. Amen. So, and after that, they go to sleep in the prow part of the ship. But actually storms do take place, and it can be an extremely unpleasant experience. So this is Roberto da Sanseverino. Okay, I read it in Italian in an emphatic way so that it may be understood. E perché se ingrossava continuamente, non videndo altro rimedio, lo patrono fece scrivere molti nomi de sancti in brevi e ponerli in una birretta, e disse ad alcuni peregrini, tra i quali furono dicti Signore Roberto e compagni, che ogni uomo togliesse uno dei dicti brevi e facesse nota al santo che gli trovaria suso scritto, che come fosse in terra firma, gli fariano dire una messa a suo onore e gitasseno li brevi in mare. E così fu fatto, e come a Dio piacque, la sera cessò la pioggia e lo vento. So you understood what's meant. The brevi were small pieces of paper where they wrote names of the most important saints. Then each passenger took one of these papers and promised to finance the performance of a mass in honor of the saint whose name was written on the paper, on the condition that he may help the ship to go through this danger, to be saved, to escape shipwreck. So this is a very common practice for sailors. Another way was obviously to perform prayers. And in some way, prayers is always considered to be, in the Middle Ages and also in its later part, as a sort of dialogue with the holy ones. And sometimes pilgrims are convinced that God and the saints respond to their prayers by showing miraculous signs. One of these signs is described by Santo Brasca in 1480. La notte sequente, perseverando pur dicta fortuna in maggiore asperità, apparse miracolosamente uno doppiero acceso in sulla popa, il quale gli stette per spazio de ore 4 e poi disparve. So this is a light appearance. It is described as a lit candle which miraculously appears over the ship. And the same phenomenon occurs the following night, and the pilgrim sees 3 lights this time. And sailors explain that they are the Virgin Mary, Saint Nicholas, and Saint Elmo of Gaeta, another protector of sailors. What were they seeing? This is a very natural phenomenon, which is still known as Saint Elmo's fire. So we are speaking of bright blue or violet clouds, which are seen around the sharply pointed end of the mainmast, shortly before a storm. They are produced by the ionization of the air molecules in the electric field that takes place around the pointed end during thunderstorms when high voltage differentials are present. So it's a physical phenomenon, but a very important one because it is paralleled with lit candles in the church, and these should correspond to saints appearing miraculously to manifest their protection for the ship. So again, another visual experience in some way associated with navigation. Again, the storms were perceived as caused by the fight between devils and angels. And you see here, more or less, the Archangel Michael appearing on the mainmast, which can be considered to be a sort of iconographic rendering of the St. Elmo's fire phenomenon. Okay. Then it may be that the mainmast may be broken by a lightning. This is a terrible experience which is described by Nompart de Caumont at the beginning of the 15th century. Car ne n'a venu que de ces tenus plus compte ne que cuida jamais voir terre, voyant que le grand arbre qui la nef menait était en pièces, et le feu en le nef, et nous en pouvions aider, et étions au milieu de la grande mer, où l'on ne voit que ciel et eux, heaven and water. Et ne savions nulle nef en nulle part pour nous aider et secourir. Et ainsi, en telle manière, allions ça et là pour la mer, comme perdus, avec grande paour et douktance, attendant piteusement la miséricorde de Dieu notre Seigneur. Et ces propos, chacun de tout son cœur s'est commandé à lui bien souvent et à la béninoite Vierge Marie, sa chère mère pleine de pitié, en leur faisant chacun plusieurs vœux et promissions que leur pleut nous faire cette grâce de nous sauver le vie et nous donnant venir à quelque port à sauvement. So everybody is pronouncing vows, and vows means that you promise something in return for your safe arrival to a port. and this may be in the form of offering candles, of offering money, or offering even your life. Somebody can say, I will serve you all the life, I will respect your feast every year. Or, but in some cases, the crew and passenger decide to make a collective vow to build a church. This is documented again by Common. It happens somewhere in the open sea in front of the Peloponnesus, and they decide to erect, to build up a church, a votive shrine in honor of the Virgin Mary, which will be called Saint Mary of Pity. And this is something which does happen. We don't know if the church is still preserved, though I was unable to locate this place. But in any case, it's a possibility to, and we will see that some of the places visited by pilgrims were on their turn buildings having been founded with this same votive purpose by sailors, often in one night. But not all passengers were convinced that prayers might have been efficacious against storms. This happens to Felix Fabry at a certain point. And during a storm, they started performing prayers, and some noblemen say they should shut up because it may be they allege that God would have already stopped the storm if he would have liked their prayers, so it was better to stop them. But you know, the most tragical situation was that of being in the open sea without wind, without seeing any coast at the horizon, and in those circumstances the only way was to perform continuously the holy word. I have mentioned the beginning of the prayer and the final part of the prayer, but what is of interest now is the content of the main litany, which is a very strange litany, which begins with a rather ordinary prayer in honor of the most important Christian and saints of universal worship. It begins with the Holy Sepulchre. This is in Old Italian. Dienai el Santo Sepolcro, God help us, and the Holy Sepulchre. Dienai el Santo Sepolcro, dienai il Santo Sepolcro. And then it begins, it's the Holy Virgin and the Holy Cross of Mount Calvary. And then there is a list, a normal list of the most important saints. You see Archangel Michael, St. John the Baptist, John the Evangelist, St. Peter, St. Paul, and down until the specialists of sea travel like Nicholas or Ermo. But the second part of the litany is of much more interest because it stands out for its listing not of saints, but of places. Places which are located along the sea coast of the Mediterranean. Yeah. Okay, so, yeah.
And besides this small example, and of course Venice, which is partly perceived to be also seen from the sea, do we have any other examples which are churches which were specifically conceived to be seen from the ship?
Yes, I will discuss a specific case tomorrow because, no, but there are several cases. But this one is one of the most enigmatic in some way. It's important because of its geographic location. It's basically on the border, let's say, between the Ionian and the Aegean seas. So it's important for navigation. It's an orientation point for all ships going along the coast of the Peloponnesus, and in a way, it is sanctified by sailors because of its geographic position, not so much because of the presence of some relic or important shrine or whatever. There is only a small chapel, as I was saying, a chapel probably associated with a hermit or somebody living there alone. But and probably this chapel could be seen only from the ship prow, but not so much. It was not really accessible, or not that accessible from Earth. So
just for me, it's really very interesting because I would say it's really comparable to also the whole some holy places where we are walking. This function which is in between, let's say, orientation point, sanctification of the territory, and also which makes you see that you are going on, that you are approaching the places. So it would be really interesting to see also, I told you map, but it would be also interesting to on the previous map, all the places were there, or it was just one of this one? So because there are still very few of them. I mean, a lot of them, but not so much.
This map includes all the sites mentioned in the two Genoese and Florentine versions of the litany, of the Sante Parole. And no, there are no more places.
But still it's interesting because it's like, the points which was tiny yesterday,
but
going on the map, each X you have the place which is
basically in this area are listed the most important port of calls along the coastal navigation to the Eastern Mediterranean. Minor shrines are not included. What is not the case, for example, for Liguria, in the Genoese version, you have really all rocks, all small chapels located along the coast. In this case, they limited themselves to pay homage to the most important churches or shrines or small memorial spots or relics located along the navigation route from the eastern, the Sea of the Levant to Venice.
But can you read it as a sort of symbolic itinerarium or not? That's my question. I mean,
no, it's a real itinerary. It's the obliged itinerary for Venetian ships to the Levant, but this is sanctified, it's invested with symbolism. It's in some way the opposite way, but it's a way of sanctifying this stretch of sea, but also because it's connected to the Holy Land, obviously, which is most clear in the pilgrims' approach. But for sailors, it's also important to include some major spots which are located on critical passages or passageways from one sea to another. So, for example, here Cassiope in Corfu, Cape Malea. So Cassiope is on the Strait of Butrint, when you pass from the Adriatic to the Ionian Sea. Cape Malea marks the passage from the Ionian to the Aegean. And then you have Rhodes and Castellorizo, so the passage from the Aegean to the Sea of Levant. So, all these crucial marking points in the navigation experience are sanctified by sailors, and their religious value is connected basically, if not exclusively, with the needs of navigation. Otherwise, you will never go there for other reasons, unless you were obliged to stop. When you pass, especially here, it's very critical because of rocks, but also because of opposite winds. If you have southeastern winds, you cannot enter the Strait of Butrin. You are forced to stay in the bay, in the small bay of Cassiope, and you have to wait that the winds go the opposite way. So it's an obliged stop in some way, a natural port of call. And this is sanctified. There is a small chapel, I will explain this tomorrow, but there is a small chapel in a ruined place, there is nothing, but it is invested with very special meanings. And the same comes with Cape Maleas and other places. Well, this is also the sanctification of this sea route to the Holy Land is also a phenomenon which becomes especially visible starting from the very moment when pilgrims embark in Venice and go along this navigation route. So it's a phenomenon of the 14th and 15th and early 16th centuries. Starting from this period, pilgrims stopping in the different port of calls along this route notice the presence of important relics, and perhaps they are even offered new relics by local authorities. And in some way, this gives shape to a sort of preliminary holy topography, anticipating that of the Holy Land, which is dotted with holy mementos, reminding pilgrims of what they are expecting to see in Jerusalem and other places. But I will even go a step further. In these places, they find holy objects which cannot be encountered, which cannot be met in the Holy Land. They find relics and they find miraculous images. So two types of holy objects which did not exist in the Holy Land because it was known to have been deprived of its most famous relics, holy bodies, contact relics, and images. They were all known to have been transferred to either Constantinople or Rome or other important centers of Christianity, whereas the Holy Land was basically an empty space from this viewpoint. The object of worship in the Holy Land differs from any other holy object in Christian experience in the sense that they are grafted onto the soil. They are portions of ground whose authority and worship worthiness is connected with a holy event, so it has a memorial quality, but also it is considered to be materially holy since it was transformed in some way in a sort of contact relic, in a sort of hollowed ground when it was touched by Christ's body. So it is in this direction. So what you are expected to worship in the Holy Land are basically holes in the ground. It is so on the rock of Golgotha, it is so in the cave of Bethlehem, it is so in many other places, which is somewhat also, some pilgrims notice this difference, but it's important. But along the route to the Holy Land, you find a number of holy mementos which are closer to the types of holy objects the pilgrims are acquainted with are accustomed to. So pieces of holy bodies, full bodies, and miraculous images. So William Way, for example, tries to establish a sort of description of this topographic network, how it is integrated. And he speaks obviously of the most important mementos in the Holy Land, and mentions also the relics which were original in the Holy Land but were translated to other places, and especially the Christological relic, the Holy Lance, the Holy Hood, the Holy Thorn, and so on. And he's perfectly aware that they are no longer over there, but a number of them can be worshipped in some of the port of calls visited by pilgrims. In the case of Christological relics, there was a very important collection established by the Hospitallers in Rhodes, we will speak about it, but also in minor places they could find reminders of the gospel events and of the Holy Land. So in this map, you can see the distribution of the most important kinds of relics. So you see, for example, that mementos of Saint Catherine, who was worshipped basically in the Sinai monastery, were spread a little bit around the sea routes. Already in Venice, one could see an ampulla of oil, and then moving along, one could find important relics of St. Catherine in Rhodes, and again in Famagusta, and then in Alexandria, obviously. Holy places, memorial sites of St. Catherine. Apostolic memoirs were found in Venice, in Candia, and in Paphos. Christological relics could be seen in Venice, Zadar, Dubrovnik, Ragusa, Candia, Rhodes, Famagusta. So practically the most important port of calls had Christological relics, suiting the pilgrim's wish to see, to reconstruct, to mentally and physically reconstruct the events, especially of the Passion. And the same is also, can be said also of icons said to have been made by St. Luke, that is, holy portraits of the Virgin and Christ, which were distributed almost everywhere. Venice, Dubrovnik, there was another one on the island of Lesna, which is not included, in Cassiope, as we will see, in the Strophades Island, in Modon, in Candia, in Rhodes, and again in Nicosia, and even in Alexandria. So, you know, in some way, the experience of navigation was associated with an almost uninterrupted distribution of icons attributed to St. Luke. Yeah.
Do you have any information if the pilgrims being on the boat these long days were reading or praying or having preaching to them about the Holy Land
About the Holy Land?
If they were preparing also during the time on the boat using this time?
No, we know that they were praying continuously, the priests, the friars, obviously, but no, there was no special sort of preparation. No, I don't have any documents about this specific devotion to the Holy Land over there. But it is much possible, even probable, given that we know that some of them bought earlier travelogues in Venice. Probably they were reading these travelogues before arriving to the Holy Land, so their experience was certainly determined, also conditioned by their reading of earlier travelogues. But no, but not about prayers. I don't have any specific hint at this. Yeah.
I'm just interested if those relics you just named, the Sanctifying or those cries from the Holy Land, if they were spread mainly around the coastline, or if they were spread also in the landlocked countries, or it's just like...
Well, you know, no, they were really a phenomenon of the coastal towns. So all ports offered some reminders of the Holy Land and of the gospel events. You have also to consider that here, all this area was under Ottoman rule in this period, so there was no specific.
But for example, we can find such relics in Rome or...
Yes, obviously. Yeah, in Rome, well, for example, for the distribution of icons by St. Luke, we can say that there is a movement from Rome towards the north, which becomes especially important in the 15th century. So a number of important ecclesiastical and political centers provide themselves with images, often made in the Greek way, as they say, which are allegedly said to be either original works by St. Luke or images in some way replicating the originals kept in Rome and in Constantinople. But they are often due to the initiative of kings or important ecclesiastical figures. Here we have something different because, you know, Cassiope is no important center. It's an abandoned center. So, but nevertheless, pilgrims start imagining or investing an icon preserved in a very small ruined chapel in this place with such an important pedigree, if I can say in this way. So there is a process of legendary construction associated with the materiality of specific sites, which are not important centers. Their importance is connected only with navigation, not with political or religious preeminence. Well, it's midday. I don't know if I have another perhaps 5 minutes, or otherwise I can leave this for tomorrow.
Yeah, as you wish. I think. Then I will like a bit faces because what we can do 5 more minutes.
Yeah, I mean,
but maybe because there's a problem with the cooking, you know, the timing.
Okay.
So let's maybe leave it for tomorrow, and let's try to start here at 10 tomorrow with workshop, because tomorrow we will not have to move anywhere. We stay here, so we can like do it, and therefore. So thank you very much, Michele, and we'll push you tomorrow. Maybe I think also, well, maybe just the cookers can like go, and we can still get a small discussion. I think.
Yes, yeah, obviously, if you have questions.
Because you asked something related to the are there any questions, remarks, curiosities?
I would like to have just one question. It's concerning these walls you were talking about, and this connection of the boat with the church. Because we know that in the church in the 13th century there was this sound of the bells and stuff like this, which could protect like the area from demons and also
You mean the role of music as a strategy to fight demons in some way? No, we have basically the witness we have is the one I read. So this playing musical instruments, especially flutes, in order to signal the beginning of the mass. But I have no hint at the use of music against storms. No. But probably because it was also difficult to play music, in such situations.
Any other questions?
I'm just curious. When you spoke about those sort of places in the litany you said in the book, I'm just interested if they're in some of the lists where ever mentioned Mont-Saint-Michel.
No, I forgot to mention this. Mont-Saint-Michel is never mentioned, but this may be due to the fact that from the area of Brest, there is an abbey near Brest which is mentioned in the Genoese version of the litany. They move directly to the English coast. So, but in any case, they even mention Rome or two places in Germany, so in Bavaria. So they could have included it, which makes me suspicious of the holiness of Mont-Saint-Michel in the Middle Ages.
Well,
this is a kind of...
The sources are from the 15th century.
Well, it's more complicated than that. The present versions we have date from the 15th century. But there are some there is some internal evidence that the core of this litany belongs more probably to the 14th century, because, for example, there is a church of Our Lady of the Cave in Famagusta, which is mentioned only in the 14th century, and there is no mention of Paphos, for example. In the 15th century, Paphos became the most important port in the island, and there is no mention at all. So I suspect that the basic core of the litany was established in the 14th century, but then probably the added sides according to their needs, to the places that they were visiting. And so this makes me especially suspicious of their silence about Mont-Saint-Michel.
Is it weird? And also Santiago is mentioned there, or not?
Yes.
It is.
Not only Santiago, and also St. Mary of Muschia, which is a church at Finisterre Cape, just on the coast. So.
But it's interesting because I have a certain I don't know. I suppose that the Mont-Saint-Michel was quite visited by pilgrims in the 11th and 12th century, and there was a certain decline after. So.
This may be a reason why. But I don't know if
it's not a port at all. By boat, you cannot arrive to Mont-Saint-Michel, or by a big boat.
Yeah.
On the contrary, very dangerous. If you are trying to arrive by boat,
because of the bottom, which is very low. Yeah.
No, the main point, you have to go by small boats, but if you take the big one, it's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to attack in military way this coast, because you cannot enter there. So
okay, this may be a reason, but nevertheless, there were also analogous situations, such as Mount Carmel, for example. You couldn't get in this period to Mount Carmel. It was very complicated. Yeah. And you could, normally, ships were accustomed to greet the holy site by shooting cannonballs. And there is no instance of this in our sources about Mont-Saint-Michel. So I think there is still much to do about this story, the extent to which Mont-Saint-Michel was considered to be a holy site. I'm not thoroughly persuaded. I mean, we should get rid of our modern approaches and superstructures. And I mean, Mount Gargano is also a mystery because it's not always mentioned by all of them. But basically, I think, and if we look at the map, you see that the Italian Adriatic coast has a very limited number of holy sites mentioned. So basically you go from Venice to Rimini, but Rimini is mentioned only by the Genoese, and then Ancona, which is mentioned only by the Florentines, and then Monte Sant'Angelo, okay, mentioned only in the Florentine version, but no, this is mentioned in both versions, also Ancona, sorry. Bari, Brindisi, and Santa Maria di Leuca, and then Taranto. So that's all. I haven't put all of them here, but perhaps in the previous image. Okay, you see that the Tyrrhenian coasts are much more dotted with holy shrines invoked by sailors. So this is due probably to the needs of navigation. There was much more circulation in this area than in the other coast. I don't know.
We just two observations, because from the chat, someone who is like following us, Peter Dochetri, who sent us two informations and asked one question. So the two informations are that 40 ducats contains 140 grams of gold.
Okay.
So in today's euro, 4,900 euro is the price, but that 40 ducats in 15th century was the equivalent of 1 year's salary for experienced trading person. So 1 year of salary. So not so bad. And then is the question if there are any recorded evidence of children accompanying adults in the pilgrimage.
No, I never found, at least in my experience, I never found hints at children going on pilgrimage.
Okay.
No.
So
in this period, in my sources, obviously.
You said that it was possible to go only twice a year to the Holy Land, and I can imagine there are more people who wanted to go. Is there any list of waiting, or how the selection was organized? Was this only a question of money, or do we know something about it?
No, pilgrims don't say, but I think that all of them found a way to embark. But no, I don't have any specific evidence about this.
Okay. But it was especially for the rich people, right?
But it was expensive, as we have a confirmation that it was expensive. And basically, those who wrote travelogues were either priests or friars or secretaries of noble people. So we have many cases of dukes and counts and princes who went on pilgrimage and brought somebody who wrote basically the diary of their voyage. But also we know that there were less privileged people, because they are mentioned sometimes, and even women, and the women were basically very rich people. But
just a question just to raise up. Were there pilgrims on the Alps or other?
Yeah, this is a...
Probably might explain, the poorer people.
Yeah, the poor people probably were paid by some rich people. And we have many instances of, not only living people, but also dead people who established this in testaments. They gave money for somebody to go to the Holy Land to pray for the soul of his beneficiary. We have many instances of this. Many merchants, many usurers tried to do something for their soul's sake in advance, but perhaps even more commonly after death. And so they pay some poor person to go on pilgrimage. So perhaps the poor people are really those paid by the spirit. And another category of people which is not very much taken into account in discussions of medieval pilgrimage is that of those who were condemned to go on pilgrimage. This happened in several cases. Normally, I mean, as a kind of pain instead of be kept in jail, you could opt for doing a pilgrimage to some important shrine. Normally, we are speaking of local shrines. It depended obviously on you know, the condemnations of what you had to do, but we have some instances of people who were condemned to go to Famagusta, for example, and we have a written account by the bishop of Famagusta who confirmed that this guy had actually gone, had arrived, in Famagusta to fulfill his duties.
My previous question that I had was related to the map, and I wonder whether there is any evidence of this pilgrimage to all of the Holy Land. You mentioned the one starting from Venice, but is there anything parallel from Genoa?
Well, a very few pilgrims embark in Genoa, but it's rare after the mid-14th century. Still in the beginnings, the first half of the 14th century, we have some instances. Then it becomes extremely rare. I know one for Anselm Adorno, who was a merchant from Bruges, but of Genoese origin, so perhaps he used Genoa because of his personal connection with Genoese merchants. But otherwise, you know, common pilgrims who were not members of the mercantile elite tended to go to Venice because there was a sort of local organization. It became a sort of monopoly of Venice on the organization of this Holy Land pilgrimage.
So, any other questions, remarks? So if not, I think we can stop for now. Thank you very much, Michele.
Okay.
And,
You.
we're looking forward to pursue the world.